On the jobs market, well, this time in the European situation, the subject is often whether to be in or out of the EU, and that whole debate is back again. A new survey by the manufacturing organisation EEF has found that 85% of its businesses want to stay in the EU. Now, it matters here in the East Midlands in particular because of the important role that manufacturing still plays in our economy. According to the EEF, 302,000 people in the East Midlands work in the manufacturing sector. That's 13.9% of the workforce, the highest in the UK. And what's more, it's on the increase. In the last 3 years, the number of manufacturing jobs in our region has increased by 16%, compared with a national average of -1%. Arnab Dutt is a Leicestershire businessman who's alarmed by talk of leaving the European Union. His firm in Market Harborough supplies rollers for escalators around the world.
So we have 10 people working here in our factory. On a monthly basis, nearly 30% of our output is going to Europe, and in fact the wheels you see behind me are on their way to Germany next week. And I passionately believe that it's really important that we stay in the EU. With a caveat that not everything is okay in the EU, but it's incredibly important for UK SMEs. We're part of much larger supply chains, the companies that export into Europe, and if they disappear, we're going to be in big trouble. The strength of being in the EU is that we're part of a collective bargaining group, and that means that the UK has a disproportionate amount of leverage when the EU negotiates with the United States on a free trade agreement, when we negotiate with ASEAN countries. So by staying in the EU, we have greater access to the world markets than we would if we were on our own. I truly believe that.
Arnab Dutt and his strong case to stay in the European Union. But not everyone in the business community is quite so sure. We're joined by Stephen Castons, who runs a Nottingham-based advertising and marketing firm which operates globally. He's also a Conservative candidate for next year's European parliamentary elections. Now, Stephen, the fact is surely that the EU matters, and matters seriously for an economy like the East Midlands. And isn't all the possibility of any revival in the economy here going to be jeopardised by all the Eurosceptic talk that we're hearing about in the build-up to any referendum?
Yes, it could be, but I think the thing that we've got to realise with all the sort of Eurosceptic talk is that Europe is very important, whether we're in the European Union or outside the European Union, for the economy, both nationally and locally. And, it's not going to be the case that if we ever left that we would then, suddenly go out to the mid-Atlantic and bury our heads under the Atlantic Ocean. We have to have a strong working relationship with Europe, and that is very important for business, and it's very, very important
If David Cameron doesn't get his renegotiated terms,
yes,
and we go into a referendum, what happens? Do you think that the UK should come out if we don't get those terms, those improved terms?
I think we can't. It is very, very, very difficult to say because it entirely depends on what he does actually get.
What do you want him to get?
I want him to get a very, very strong renegotiation because I think...
On what?
On the way that Europe works, because I think that it is important. It is important for business. We need that level playing field. We need that open market. We need the opportunity to export. We need access to things like the TTIP treaty. But on the other hand, what we do not want are some of the sort of, shall we say, difficult bureaucratic elements that keep creeping in and sort of mission creep that tends to...
Well, Arnab was telling us that he registered for a patent for one of his firm's products, and he said that for £700 and filling in one form, he could get protection in 28 countries, the 28 countries across the EU. Now, that doesn't sound like red tape to me. That sounds like good business practice.
That is very good. And in the future, he will have access also through that same system to the whole of the North American area as well through TTIP. But it's more the way that sort of legislation and the cost of running the EU in Brussels, the whole Strasbourg and moving back to Brussels issues, and that whole bureaucratic element is just not giving us a level playing field for business. So the cost and the bureaucracy.
Yeah. Bill, I mean, you've been a member of the European Parliament longer than most MEPs. You must be kind of banging your head against a brick wall when you still hear this Euroscepticism?
No, it's healthy that there is a debate. There are things that need changing in Europe. I completely agree with Stephen. Nothing is perfect. It's a family. It's a compromise of 28 countries, so nobody's going to find it perfect. So we undoubtedly need changes, but we have to stay in, because the key point is...
We have to stay in.
Because we have to have a say and a voice and a vote to influence the others. If we quit and become like Norway, who just receive faxes about what's been decided, that's throwing away Britain's influence. We've got to be on the inside with our say and our ability to change things.
UKIP aren't going to be satisfied in a way with what your programme is at the moment, which seems to be wanting the best of both worlds, because UKIP are very, very clear, and that's going to be very attractive to the electorate, isn't it? It
is. It's a very easy sort of message to give, but I think the electorate are quite wise to this. I think what really we've got to remember is that the whole origins of the EU go back to the sort of 1950s and the 1970s, when it was a very, very different political situation. You had the Cold War, you got the sort of the whole spectre of the Second World War hanging over, and a lot of countries were sort of thinking about that, as were the Eastern European countries when they wanted to come in.
Let me bring in Anne here. I mean, Anne, can you imagine a situation with the UK out of the EU?
No, I agree with what's been said before. You've got to be in there on the inside to change it rather than be outside hammering on the door. And I think it's easy for people to see what we put into the EU. We don't always see what we get back, and we do get a lot back in Derbyshire. Been big investments in Chesterfield, including the Market Hall refurbishment and so on. We've got European money helping us to roll out broadband across the county, investment in Cromford Mills with a creative cluster, a whole load of rural development programmes as well. So real benefits that people perhaps don't acknowledge.
Well, of course, if we do have a referendum, you, of course, will have a say on Europe. And Des has been out in Nottingham to get your views.
So you've heard what the businessmen and the politicians in the studio think. Let's find out what the people of Nottingham think. Jay, in or out of Europe?
In.
Why?
I don't want Britain to be isolated from a business point of view as well. We need to be able to export to Europe, to be able to climb out of what's left of the recession.
Well, we've got a business, and personally, I'd stay out of Europe.
Why?
Why? Because I think this country's about time it stood alone. You don't need anybody telling you what you've got to do, what you can't do. You can't do this with your business, you can't do that with your business.
And all these EU laws have a vast impact on everything.
I say we should be in Europe.
We should be in Europe?
Yeah. For the simple reason is, it should be able to give us more jobs and so on, and opportunities to do other things, as well as business abroad.
I think we ought to come out.
Why?
Well, we're England, aren't we? I think we can do ourselves.
I live and work in Germany right now, and I assume that's really easy because we're a part of Europe, do you know what I mean? And we've got all these good relationships. And if we leave, then we can't do fun things like going to work in other countries. There are a lot of advantages that come from it.
Does it really matter what I think? They're going to do what they want to do anyway.
Stephen, it struck me that from those street interviews that actually many people have almost made up their mind. They have very strong views about the European Union. I'm bound to ask, why should we wait until after the general election for a referendum? Why don't we have it now?
It's too soon.
Why?
I think that the debate has to happen. There has to be a lot of discussion. We have to go into, if we do get the opportunity to have a renegotiation, let's remember there's a lot of other countries that are supporting that as well. It's not just Britain. Then it's going to be very important that we put our best team forward. I'd say take it above the political fray and actually put people from all sides into that negotiation and get the best for Britain. But it's a long process. It could well take 2 or 3 years to get a proper renegotiation.
Oh, you mean we've got another 2 years of this? Bill, it does strike me from what Anne was saying. She detailed some of the benefits for her part of Derbyshire. Isn't that what the pro-Europeans now have to do, is to spell out in very practical terms what it means for ordinary people?
Yeah, and the Engineering Employers Federation report, John, which with you started this item, actually says, if you go through it, the public opinion is due to very poor information and just not knowing the facts. I would welcome a referendum. I'm certain it's coming, and I agree with Stephen, after the renegotiation, not now. That's silly to do it before. We have it afterwards, and then the public, just as in 1975, will get all the information, the real facts, and I'm quite certain the public will vote to stay in.
And it strikes me that actually within the Labour Party, Labour have their own problems as well on this issue. I mean, I can think of at least two of your Derbyshire colleagues, MPs, Natasha Engel and Dennis Skinner, who actually want out.
Yeah, and they've got their own views. I mean, the discussion today is around business and the impact on it. Given what we've said about the East Midlands being centred on manufacturing, we can't as a country stand alone because we're not self-sufficient. We import, and more importantly in the East Midlands we export. And if you look at a company like Toyota at Burniston, I think over 80% of their production is exported to the EU, and anything that created a barrier between us and the EU would have an impact on their business.
What do you say to people, no doubt like Stephen, who would say actually future economic growth isn't going to come within the European Union and the Eurozone? We need to get out of Europe and trade with the rest of the world.
But I think it's already been said, if we act as a bloc, a European bloc, we've got much more strength than 28 individual nations trying to negotiate ways into new markets.
But I think also business, what business is after, whether we, again, as long as we stay in, business is after a level playing field. There are too many examples where perhaps we are over-interpreting sort of implementation of legislation.
Are we, Bill?
Absolutely. There's a terrible...
What have we done about it?
Well, it's Westminster, and the House of Commons fails to do its job of scrutinising legislation. Civil servants at Westminster do a horrible thing called gold plating.
OK, we've got no Westminster MPs here, so we'll leave that one hanging in the air.
Ask them next time, because they don't do their job.